pandemic of violence floods the streets of major cities as cases of the media-dubbed murder virus, MV20, soar, causing those infected to go on killing sprees. Caught in the middle, police detective Angela Miller finds her only trustworthy ally in the self-proclaimed psychic PI, Gerald Henry. As the two try to navigate the violence, they are drawn into New Age guru Abramelin Harvest's plot to heal the planet. Harvest's missive:
the world is sick, and humanity is the infection.
The cure: murder. From the twisted mind of Sean C. Baker, author of A Collection of Desires and Shadow Play in Book 1, Kim and Jesse, comes his most vicious novel yet, Murder Virus. Available where books are sold.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Horror Vision Horror Podcast. I am Sean Charles Baker.
I'm Ray, and these are going to be special episodes that Sean and I are going to start. This is a new adjunct, kind of like Most Horrible Library, called Sticks and Stones, where we're going to explore and dive into the world and the realm of folk horror.
Did you say the aroma of folk horror?
No, yeah.
Oh, the realm. I'm sorry.
The realm. The aroma of folk horror. Well, I think the aroma of folk horror. I would think, like probably a little bit of dung, some earth, blood,
butter.
Butter's a good call.
Butter's a tilbury butter.
Good call. Very good call. Very good call. Nice.
I say dung so vehemently because when I watched The Witch again last night, I watched it on Blu-ray, and I watched all the extras, and there's a lovely discussion at Salem. It's in Salem. I don't know that they said what theater it was. They might have. I missed it, but it was Anya Taylor-Joy. It was Robert Eggers, and then it was three historians. One was a professor, or they're probably all professors, whatever. But they were talking about one of the professors brought up that they say with great literature involves all of the senses, and that he really brought in the smell, and they were asking about that. And he's like, well, the smell was dung. He's like, the more I read about it, the more I was surprised that dung could actually be like a favorable odor, because it was so integral to the farm and this and that. It was interesting. So those things you don't think about.
That's funny. I mean, I've heard that before. Like there's a radio show I listen to, and the people that host it, without going into the radio show itself, but the people that host it are both from Indiana, and the guy on the show will say quite often about how he loves the smell of horse manure because he grew up on a farm and like near horses. So it's just the smell that he enjoys. It's the smell that like feels like home to him. So I could see how that would make sense. I could definitely see how that makes sense.
So, okay. So what we really wanted to do, there's Ray brought to my attention, and listeners, anybody with Shudder or even any eye on what's going on in horror right now will know that there's kind of this folk horror fascination going on. Shudder recently changed the Shudder TV, the middle station, from the Ghoul Log, and previously I think it was psychological thrillers. Now it's the folk horror collection, and they got a lot of the films that are in the Severin collection. They just put out all the Haunts Be Ours. They also added Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, which is the new documentary written and directed by Kirla Janice. And really, there's just a wealth of stuff to explore. And I think, Ray, both of us, it could be said, have been drawn to this. I mean, you impressed me to no end as far as you really come at film from a very historical perspective, and like when you found a fascination with slasher movies, you've watched every fucking slasher movie you could get your hands on. And I mean,
a lot of
I
them.
respect that. I mean, and you also have a titanium trap mind. Like, you remember shit. I watch stuff and the next day I'm like, I mean, I remember saying to somebody junior year in high school, like, as the bong was passed to me, like, one day I'll probably regret this. I guess here we are, because shit falls away. No, also, I mean, there's probably a little bit of that, but also it's like, we all just consume so much media. I mean, I read, I don't know how many comics a week. I don't know. Yeah. I'm always reading novels or short stories. I'm always watching movies and TV. So, the analogy of trying to fill a shot glass with a 5-gallon jug, that's what I always go back to, maybe just to make myself feel better about the brain damage I suffered upon myself early in life. But at any rate, so coming at this, I do feel like we have gravitated toward these films over the course of doing the Horror Vision.
I think there's that, and I think it's just, I don't know why, but like, I mean, there's things like possession films and horror. There's genres definitely, and for whatever reason, whenever there's been like a folk horror title, I felt like I go to it and I watch it, like, and there's things that I didn't even realize, but I'm like, I guess that is folk horror. Like,
same.
You watch the kill list, and like as it progresses, you're like, holy shit, this is a folk horror movie. And there's that. There's certain movie like Vi. I didn't even think about Vi, the Russian horror film. But once you watch it and you're into it, you're like, wow, this is folk horror. And for whatever reason, maybe it's the tie to history, the way that it's dealing with so many different things. Like I one of the things that I liked about the documentary was that it attempts to go through and kind of give a little bit of a definition, and just to give our listeners a little bit of a helpful concept. I mean, or if you probably already have got a little bit of an idea, but there is a lot in it that fits. There's a lot that kind of fits into folk horror, and it almost becomes a thing of it when you see it.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's a thing of the concept of paganism and witchcraft versus Christianity that occurs. There is a lot of things about the land. There's a lot of things about folk tales. And the thing to remember is that folk tales, most of them likely evolved out of an explanation of what's going on in the world, or a way to explain away, like, why did so-and-so disappear? Why does this happen? Like,
before science, right? Before the advent of like empirical data and the processes to analyze. Yes, the process to analyze the data.
Yes, but I mean, but even still, like, there is the thing of, we get to a later point, and for example, they talk about like Stonehenge and some other like items like that or even like Easter the Stonehenge at Easter Island. And how do we explain some of these things that like we can't logically quantify or make sense of in our modern world? That like, we know how to move those kind of things now. We know how to erect these buildings and the things like that we have, because we have these pieces of modern technology. We have things that can lift very big rocks like that very easily. So how do we explain this?
Yeah, how did they do
an occurrence of maybe there's things outside of our realm of understanding. Maybe there's more about our world that we don't get, and we're not qualified to get anymore because we're not as natural as we once were. And it's all becomes part of what folk horror is. We have different movies that confront the concepts or deal with the concepts in different ways, and for whatever reason, we have been watching more and more of it than we thought.
More and more. And, like going back a year or two, so I had started it's funny because I had heard the term folk horror, obviously because of Wicker Man, right? Which I first saw 20 something years ago. But I had been seeing things like the Droving and Kill List and Field in England, and I recognized that there was something in common with Wicker Man. And like I started a list on my letterbox a couple of years ago called UK occult films, and I mentioned this on here before. Without Name was one I talked about very briefly on here, and like the Droving was one where I recommended it to you, and then you, when we were talking about doing this new series, Sticks and Stones, you said, oh, and we were like kind of going back and forth with other more modern movies to include, and you mentioned that one. I was like, oh shit, yeah. And I really gravitate towards that stuff, but I didn't think of it as the same thing as the Wicker Man. But because, okay, so one of the definitions that the documentary makes right off the bat is folk horror is the juxtaposition between the prosaic and the uncanny. And I feel like that's spot on. Yeah. And it's such a wide thing that it can go so deep. There are so many elements of this, like the same tone or texture. My love for it was stoked over a couple of years ago. Warren Ellis had a comic book he did with Declan Shalvey called Injection, and there were a lot of modern technological elements, but there was an element of this as well. And it's something that I feel like is very much more I don't want to say predominant, but like filmmakers or artists seem more aware of it in the UK than they are here, because here our country, we just raise everything and then build on top of it, right? I mean,
yeah.
Where there, Stonehenge is still there. You know what I mean? I've been to villages in the UK that look like there are elements of the same architecture there, whether it's the stones in the street or whatever, that were there hundreds of years ago. Anyway, so I think you could make the argument, I love the elegance of what you said, where it's people trying to explain, where did that person go? And they don't have the data or the scientific know-how. So they explain it in, oh, well, it's this or that. And they make up stories. And really, that's what movies are, stories. And also, really, couldn't you just say that, how did one of the first things humanity did, was they heard thunder and they said, what is that? And somebody said, it's God.
Yeah.
So really, the Bible is almost a work of folk horror,
It is, yes, absolutely. I mean, I didn't think about that, but I mean, I think the way that I guess the UK is a lot more prevalent, but Americans, I don't think we realize it, but there's things that we do come up as folk horror. They talk about a little bit in the documentary about voodoo and things like that. You don't realize it, but if you go back and you watch a film why am I blanking on the name? Angel Heart. Oh yeah. It's a folk horror story. It's about a guy who's made a deal with the devil and has to realize the devil, the deal he made, and pay for it. Which is it's a concept so steeped in folk horror of this entity that comes to you. He's offered you this chance at whatever you want for a time, and then you're going to have to pay him.
That's Faust, right?
Yeah, it very much is Faust. And he takes it, and then he realizes what happened. But we do have these stories, and there's the concept of of haunted spaces. That's another big thing in folk horror of it gets expressed in American films with things like Poltergeist.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that it gets brought up in the documentary, and we'll go into this movie more in the future. But if anyone listening has seen The Wind, which was just I think about 2 or 3 years old, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we talked about
fantastic Western folk horror movie about a woman going out west with her husband during the times of settling the West, and
the frontier, right? The same,
the frontier, yeah. It's just her and her husband, and then they meet another couple, and weird things start to happen, and it becomes that the wind itself, like just the being out there in nature, is frightening. And they're to a certain extent more modern people than like the people that once just lived in the middle of land. They live in cabins, they have clothing, they don't walk around naked.
Well, and they're farther
used to-
removed from the land itself, right? So the indigenous cultures
exactly.
live off of it and have a relationship with it. And then as you get more modern, we move away from that. So that's where it's funny, because the indigenous people come up with these myths or whatever, this folklore, to tell each other about the thunder and the lightning and whatever. And so they become acclimated to dealing with it. And then the same kind of phenomena can freak people out who are not used to living off the land. And the haunted space, the American frontier is the ultimate haunted space, because, and this is where we're going to start, this episode is going to focus on a couple movies from that, but really it's, dude, the folk horror in the United States, it's not, we don't live side by side with it like they do in Britain or Europe, but we're haunted by the fact that we came here and wiped out an entire race of fucking people and just got rid of everything that they cared about and started over. And so think about it, dude, all those fucking, like, and they talk about it in Woodland's Dark Days Bewitched, like it's such a trope. This is built on a Native American burial ground, which, first of all, so it's total white guilt, right? Or Western guilt.
Yes.
But then also, I love the way they point out that, like, there's not really any such thing. Like, it's not like, I mean, a lot of indigenous cultures burn their dead or whatever, but they didn't have the same burial practices. So we just appropriate this. It's the same way, as white men have written history, God is a white man, right? It's the same fucking bullshit. It's just the same. Oh, of course, they're just like us. They bury their dead, and whatever.
Well, the thing about Poltergeist that gets mislabeled on that film is that they're being haunted by the spirit of these people they built this community over graves.
Yeah, not a native burial
it's
site.
Not. They're not native. It's not a Native American burial ground. It's actually a strange white like cult, a cult leader whose people all died, and they buried them there on that land. And being that they were like this Jamestown kind of cult, they died probably pretty unsettled and angry. And now they're these unsettled angry spirits, and the unsettled angry spirits, you've now built graves on top of this space that they were living in. And if you want to go into one of the films we're going to talk about, which is Eyes of Fire, which is now
real quick,
Shudder.
so
okay, go.
Before we go into Eyes of Fire, so let's just delineate the fact that, like, so we're going to deal with, what was the name of the section in Woodland's Dark Days Bewitched, you said?
Call Me From the Valley, American Folk Horror.
So the way we're gonna do these episodes for Sticks and Stones, they will be adjunct, and other members of the Horror Vision may stop by, but we just have been kind of on this path ourselves, so that's why we chose to kind of split off and do this. But we're gonna, it's such a huge, unwieldy topic that we were kind of thinking, like, I don't want to just reiterate what the documentary says. The documentary is 3+ hours of just it's information. It's an information dump. So I thought, what if we start to sift through it, and, like, I want our experiences watching these movies and what they mean to us and how they tie into the things that we know that fit into this. So we're going to start there. We'll start with that chapter, and then really it's the American frontier, right? I mean, that's a large part of what we're going to be dealing with. And so we start with what was the flick, Ray?
Eyes of Fire.
So,
which I had never heard of before until Shudder added it. And then I mean, it's got first of all, fantastic poster. Like, I don't know whoever designed that poster, it's got this depiction of this tree that appears in the film that looks in like a blue background. You can look it up. It's kind of amazing. And then there's on either side of it, there's like a valley of the sky that's created by these trees on either end. And then on either side, of the tree, there are these yellow eyes, these yellow menacing eyes, reptilian looking eyes, looking out and like have shaped a red or create that poster. Kudos to you, sir. The story is interesting. It's about this group of people. Well, actually, let me go back a little bit. It focuses on these two young girls that had been found in the forest by the French. Yes, and
Sally Klein plays Fanny, and Aaron Buchanan plays Meg.
Wow, you're good. And they have been found in the forest by, or they've come upon a French settlement, and they're like, "Where did you girls come from? You know, explain to us how you arrived here." And so they tell them this story, and they were part of a settlement of a small group of people that have been basically taken in by for lack of a better term, a huckster, a con man of sorts, a cult leader named Smythe.
Basically masquerading as a minister, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he's all about his books, and because of his belief structure, and because, well, also he's having an affair with a married woman. Her husband is a trapper who goes out into the forest for very long periods of time to hunt. And because he's out in the forest, she becomes romantically entangled with this man, and they get tossed out of their village. They get ostracized, he and his followers, because of this relationship that he is having, this romance that's happening. And so they all kind of decide, okay, well, fine, we'll go out to this is a big country, we'll go out into the forest, we'll find our own place.
Well, he's almost hung. They almost, like the rest of the people in the little settlement, they recognize he's a huckster, and they basically go drag him out of bed and hang him. And then it's just, so at the last minute he's saved, and then it's this family and him, and they leave.
Yeah. And so they're out, and almost immediately they're happened upon by a group of, I think they're supposed to be Indians. I can't confirm that because we don't ever see them clearly, but they're shot at from the land there with arrows. A couple of the men die, which does leave some psychic turbulence or pain on a couple of the characters, which comes up later. And then they get to land, and then they start traveling inland and to try to find a place to settle. At the same time, the hunter meets up with them because he comes back and finds out his wife is left with this man. And so he catches up with them, and eventually they find this abandoned fort, which was supposedly supposed to be settled on by the French. And while he's out hunting one day, the trapper is told by a group of Indians, or it's either before that or during it, I can't remember, but he's told about how the land, the native peoples believe that the land is cursed, and the land has an evil on it and will come for whoever tries to settle on it. Which, of course, the minister, the huckster, is like, whatever. There's nothing here.
I wield the power of God. They can't affect us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And things start happening. They start seeing what they think are native people. They call them natives, but they look like naked white people covered in mud.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's if that is just was that a handicap of the casting, or was that intentional? I don't think it's really known.
I think it's intentional. And now this is my take on it, because I understand where you're coming from. I absolutely do. But I think it's intentional. And the reason I say it's intentional is because they don't define the evil as being a Native American evil. It's just defined as an evil. So I think that the evil comes in a way that is familiar to the people. Is familiar to the people that it's coming for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that
and
actually
so
makes perfect
and
sense. I love that.
plus we know from the stories and from there's one or two characters that have visions, including this girl who's supposed to be mad, whose mother was killed as a witch. We get these visions and statements from her, as well as a couple of dreams from other characters about how there was these French that came and settled, and the evil took them all. So they're all dead. The evil has taken all of them. So if anything, it could be manifesting as what they look like too. Like, we do see them very briefly, and then we don't see them again. But we do see these naked people running around, which is interesting again, because Native Americans didn't run around just like completely stark naked. So having these, it feels like it's part of the lure to me of trying to get them out from behind the walls of the barricade, to have these like naked people running around, especially with the fact that it's butting up against the Christianity and the belief structure of this of the minister, or and what he says, and about how, bodies and propriety. Because we're also, there's also the thing of one of the ways it tries to Trojan horse itself into their little incel community is that it presents them with this Native American child that's just left in front of the fort. And the minister is so arrogant as to think that like Native American people would just give up a child as a gift to these white people. And that's how he accepts it and thinks about the child as. And so his whole concept is, we're going to take her in, we're going to clothe her, we're going to teach her Christianity and Christian ways, and we're going to save her from the world. When in fact she's this Trojan horse for whatever evil is out there. And the evil, I love the way the evil is manifested. I love the look of it. It does. I think one of the things that the film kind of suffers from in this modern age is that you're watching it, and it's clearly old. It's clearly like, it's one of those things where you can tell that the special effects worked for the time, and they made it for the time. Because they didn't think that anything was going to come along and have such clarity like our modern TVs do, and our modern cameras do, that it's a little bit like when you first see a TV show when they first started filming in high def, and you're like, whoa, why is that person got so much makeup on? What is happening? They look like some kind of street whore. And the answer is because they were still touching up people's faces for the cameras before the HD came along. So once the HD came along, they had to go, whoa, we have to approach this with so much more subtlety than we did before. So it does, there's a little bit of a cheesiness to the way it looks, but you can tell what they were going for. I think it's fantastic.
It transcends, I feel like it transcends. There's definitely elements that are dated. So it came out in 1983, written and directed by Avery Crounse. He did like two other movies, one of which I have a feeling you might have seen, called The Invisible Kid from 1988. It just looked like an 80s movie you would know.
Oh yes, I have seen that.
I had a feeling, I'm just saying, I know that's one of your wheelhouses.
Oh my God, so I can't believe I know that movie.
I can totally believe you know that movie, but one day it would be cool if we watch it. But anyway, so this was a lost movie from what I've read. Like, this movie didn't really get any play, and nobody really gave a shit about it. I don't even think it was never available digitally. I'm not sure if it was available on VHS or not, but this is the first time this has been, so this is in the Severin Films All the Haunts Be Ours set. And they're the first people to go and get this and clean up. And it's a wonderful restoration, but it does, as you say, you start to see some of the shortcomings of the effects and the makeup and whatnot. It's not terrible though. I mean,
No.
they use a lot
Not
of
by
that.
any means.
And in fact, I was saying to you, I really wonder. I don't think it necessarily works like this, but there's so many things about this movie that remind me of David Lynch, where like the way that the naked mud people appear, where it's just like I don't know what the technique is called to do this because I don't edit film, unfortunately. But it's like they just appear, so you can tell that they've been like spliced in, and then they just start running around, and then they cut out or they fade out. Things fade out or fade in. It's a very dated 80s effect, but it looks to me a lot like what he did with some of the Dugpa stuff in Twin Peaks: The Return. The witch that is eventually we eventually see is the kind of penultimate evil in Eyes of Fire. I'm trying to remember. Do they call it a witch, or was there a specific name for it?
What's that? What is the name of the girl? The
Leah
nutty
is the
girl?
psychic.
Leah. Oh wow, I didn't notice that before. But on the IMDb page for Eyes of Fire, she's listed as Leah, Queen of the Forest.
Yeah, because dude, at the very beginning, when the French, in somewhat questionable accents, are questioning Meg and Fanny, the two girls that survive, or actually make their way to some form of civilization after they escape, and they say, how did you come here? Like you said, they think that it's some somebody encroaching on their territory, and they're explaining we the queen of Leah, the queen of the forest, saved us from the witch or whatever it is they say. The witch. It is the witch. But that looks a little bit like the dumpster witch, as I always call it, in Mulholland Drive. There's just things that really reminded me of David Lynch, and I wondered if he had maybe seen it back in 1983. It's very.
I wonder that too as I was watching it. I can't remember if there's a name for it. It's called The Witch, mostly by Leah. She's the one that tells Marion the Trapper about how to defeat her, and which is something that that's another thing about this that I was like, that's really cool. Like there's a point at which Leah disappears into the forest, and then she just becomes this ethereal character that's like almost like a fairy that is helping them. And the explanation becomes that like maybe like the way they describe her mother as being a witch, and she having had her watched her mother get executed in front of her, that like I don't know, I feel like maybe part of the explanation is of that character is that like she's what they took as a witch was actually some kind of like fairy folk blended into human society, and that what they interpreted as like evil, we have to get rid of it, was actually this fairy folk. And Leah is very much living between the human society and this natural world, and when she disappears and then shows up to help them again, it's because she's become a lot more ingrained in that natural world that's where she should be living. And one of the ways that she is able to defeat one of the ways they're able to defeat is that it's not just that Marion fights off the witch and kills the witch, her power then becomes Leah's. And so Leah becomes a force for benevolence and good in this space. But one of the things when I stopped myself and when I was talking about Poltergeist was that this brings up the thing of in American folk horror of the concept of space is not necessarily being haunted by evil, by the spirits of people that were killed on them or anything like that. It's so much more of a concept of almost psychic trauma. And that the space, having had something evil happen on it, or having something happen in the space, becomes traumatized, scarred by what happened. And so the the space itself is traumatized, and what you're experiencing is that trauma and that evil, because it's the land or the temporal area, whatever you want to call it, is stuck, is scarred.
Yeah, I mean, and that, like, you see that in a lot of different things where it's like the haunting is, it's this energy, this residue or whatever, but also, like,
exactly.
It's not just haunting too. Like, you get, so I remember years and years ago reading Grant Morrison kind of in an interview talking about, if, for those that don't know now, like, rock star famous comic book author Grant Morrison, talking about how the way that society builds and builds and builds and builds, we're taking away, we're like building on every available space, and we're eliminating these kind of like sacred in between spaces. Like when I grew up, there was a prairie across the street from our first house, and it was a sacred in between place to the kids, because it had really, really high grass that you could get lost in and stuff like that. Later when I moved out into the areas of the south suburbs of Chicago where there's forest. I mean, forests, and that's what we're dealing with here on the frontier, where, like, in this movie, and also like The Witch, which we'll kind of segue to in a bit, but like, you're surrounded by forest, and how deep is it? Like, who knows? And just because this is the thing, like, just there are thin spaces. That's a thing that's is in a lot of horror fiction in general, but like Stephen King and just so much stuff. And the idea that, okay, there's 3 miles of forest between 88th Avenue and Keene Avenue or whatever. Well, what if it's more than 3 miles? Just because it's 3 miles on the map doesn't mean when you walk through it, it's not 10 miles. Because what if there's a thin space that you would slip into some other place while you're there?
That's interesting.
So I've always loved those concepts, and this is one of the things that ultimately has really kind of brought me into the folk horror thing. And those spaces, though, are being eliminated. So that I think with, especially in the States, there's so much anxiety and guilt and fear, and a lot of it is like, so look. White people came in, we were afraid of the natives, and we thought, oh, they're savages, fuck them, whatever. But like, we're afraid of them, so we wipe them out. We're afraid of minorities. I mean, I'm not, but I'm just saying, I'm not afraid of natives either, but I'm just saying. So, look at the white flight in the late 60s, early 70s, and then like the kind of, which is goes into another element of folk horror, the kind of back to nature movement that, like, now all of a sudden a lot of white people are moving out of the cities and going to, these rural places. And we're always afraid of anything different or what we don't know. And there's so much of that in our society. And I think that informs so much of what you're seeing in these movies, whether it's stuff like this where it's with the indigenous people. And it's another thing they talk about in Woodland's Dark Days Bewitched, is this kind of idea of like the indigenous people are there to kind of like be a monster or to bestow some wisdom or whatever, but they're not even really treated as people, and they're just going to be extinct anyway, because this is kind of this manifest destiny of the land or the race or whatever. It's funny, I didn't expect there to be this much race tied into this, but they're definitely, I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I get it. Exactly. Well, I mean, the thing is, when you say the way that I think, and I think it works with especially with American folk horror. The reason that I think the indigenous people become, much like there is in some what's the word I'm looking for? Some Australian stuff that happens, where like the indigenous people recognize what's going on with the land and understand it more than the white people, and the white people are just like, oh, well, that's your old superstitious nonsense. I'm not going to believe it.
We know better.
Superstitious nonsense. I think it becomes that in American and like other colonial horror, because in the UK it becomes a butting up of old world culture versus new world culture, and
well,
that, like
it's
with Wicker
pagan
Man
versus Christian,
and things like
right?
that.
Which is another thing. It's pagan versus Christian. The
Exactly.
Romans came in and said, "You're a Christian now, or you're fucking dead." So it's the exact same thing. It's just imperialism. It's just what people fucking do. Unfortunately, not all people, but people. You know, guns, germs, and steel. Like that book says it all. It's like the people that get these advancements or whatever, they just don't use it for the right thing because they're not worried. They start to take for granted anything that is natural, and they look at it as stupid or backward. And like, no, you know, and it's so like, yes, no, I know that there's 3 miles of forest between 80th Avenue and Keene Avenue. It's like, that's what the scientific, the modernist will say. And the indigenous person might say, there's not. Well, look at my map. I used a satellite to, you know, whatever, to geolocate, make geofences or whatever. And no, it's not. You can walk through. It'll take you 2 days. And from there, like, you could just tell a million fantastic stories, and you can outline a lot of this. And horror comes from fears and anxieties and this whole kind of struggle, because that's what we are. Just as a fucking species, it's what we do. We struggle in one way or another.
Exactly. And it's interesting. It's interesting because of how it in some of these stories, how it manifests. Like in Eyes of Fire, its concept is it's a dark spirit, it's a witch, and it's more about something trying to amass power and gain these spirits of these people, because it gets more and more powerful that way. But it's not the devil. It's not like, it's just this indiscriminate evil that exists. Whereas there's other stories where it is the devil, where it's a lot more of like, this is the devil. This is the devil butting up against Christianity. And as I said before we started recording this episode, and like some of the movies we've been watching and getting ready for this, I find it interesting that when with some of these stories that like, and maybe this is a good like transition into this one of the other movies we want to talk about tonight, of how these stories tend to have people that are be a good transition into another movie we watch, because I find it interesting that, especially with a lot of these stories, the way that we have these belief structures, these old world belief structures, like an evil spirit or the devil or whatever else, paganism, butting up against usually some kind of either Christian or some other religious zealotry. That like the people that are experiencing these things, the way that they express the world, the way they understand the world, is to explain it as either part of their religious experience or opposing their religious experience. It's not just like, oh, that's just something that fell over. We just had a little shake. It's the devil shakes the house. Yeah. The spirit does that. Like, you know, the God gives me this. Jesus provides this. It's like, we're cursed. It's interesting the way that these stories express that, and how it's one belief structure butting up against another belief structure.
Yeah, for dominance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which just goes back to that's what we do, is we struggle. So the movie, I believe you're intending us to segue to, is Robert Eggers' 2016 fucking masterpiece, The Witch, correct?
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, we were saying before I started recording, like, Ray watched it earlier today. I watched it last night. That's the third time I've seen it. And I mean, I remember I saw it in the theater, like opening weekend. And that's a movie I have forgotten nothing. Like, it resonates with me a lot. And one of the things is it really, and I'm watching last night, I was saying to Ray before we started recording, God, it just shows what a stupid fucking species we are. I mean, everything with the only people in that movie I feel sorry for, the only person is Thomason. Other than that, I mean, and the baby, but you know, they're gone so quick, whatever. But I mean, everything is either God gave us this, or, you know, like there's a part where he's like, we will take fast tomorrow so that we can like think about our sins or whatever. It's like, no, you're taking fast tomorrow because you don't need fucking food. So you can spin it any way you want, Pops. Right?
Exactly.
There's a scene early after the baby disappears where the mother is, so bereft, and like the father and Caleb, this eldest son, get up, and Caleb's like, should I wake the others? He's like, no, let them sleep. The gray day like this, the devil like weighs your lids, or however he says it. And it's like, oh my God, he even uses the devil to explain oversleeping. And it's not even oversleeping. Like, they're not up at the crack of dawn, so it's the devil's work. It's like, give me a fucking break.
Yeah.
Take some responsibility for your own fucking life.
Which makes me wonder if, like, because at the beginning of the film, we watch the family get cast out.
Oh, would you love to know?
What I would love to know is that because we're presented, like, the next scene after that, after they leave the village and they're packed up on their little cart, and the next scene that cuts to is when they have their farm, and it's Thomason praying to God, and I wonder, like, which is crazy to think, but like, it's very possible. What is it like? Was their family that family that was like, they're there, and everyone else was like, dude, too much. Like, he was like, oh, gray days, it's the devil, he keeps people asleep, and they're like, yeah, it's also cold and wet. Like,
dude,
like,
you might be right. That's
guy, actually... man, can you believe this guy? Like, everybody's like, dude, did you talk to him today? Because I told him about how what a dry season it's been, and he told me the devil dries out the earth and with his warm breath, and I was like, yeah, sure does. Well, I gotta go. And then I left. But then he started chanting about the devil behind me, and I was like, wow, too much, bro. Like,
dude, I think you're right, because it is, they don't tell you what, but there's as the mayor or whatever, and him, like, there's a little bit of a back and forth, and it is based on, they talk about something about the way he is preaching, or he's not a preacher, but something about the word of God. And
there is. Right. There's a thing about, like, where he says, where he's saying to him, like, like, the way you talk about God and the way you preach God is in violation of this community. And then he said, his retort is, I will not be talked down to by someone who doesn't know how to preach the word of the Lord. And like, the guy's like, okay, I've had enough of you. And then there's the scene when they leave, when they're rolling their cart out. I didn't notice it the first time I saw it, but this time I was like, well, that's weird. So I thought they were already beyond the walls, because they're watching, like, the camera is giving you the perspective of Thomason, who's watching as they're riding away out of the village. But then they ride out, and just before they ride out the gates, and the two men close the gate with their guns, there's Indians. They're Native. I'm sorry, not Indians. I kind of hate that term. I don't know why I used it. There are Native Americans standing there. They're looking at him like, whoa, what did those guys do? They got kicked out of the village. Like, they totally have this look on their face. Like, go back and watch. It's amazing. There's these three Native American guys, and they're standing there, and they're like, whoa, they're gonna make them go live out there by themselves. Like, that's the look. That's how I interpret the look on their faces. Like, they're like, it feels like they're like looking at them as if to ask, what did they do?
Wow.
Because they're being ostracized. They can see they're being ostracized. They've got their cart, and they're like, get the hell out of here. And they're watching these white people kick out another group of white people. And to them, they must think like, wow, did they murder babies or something?
Yeah.
What did they do? And like, it's an interesting moment. But
I definitely did too. I definitely didn't see that. It
struck me so weird. I don't know why it struck me when I was watching it today, but when I was watching it, I was like, "Whoa, that was interesting." Because I thought they were beyond the gate, and then you realize, no, they're closing the gates, and the Native Americans are inside of the fort. They're in the community.
It's so interesting that the Witch and Eyes of Fire, there's so many parallels. I mean, oh my God, there are so many parallels where it's like, this group that has, they're basically excommunicated. They're cast out of the protected area. And then they willfully like, well, we don't need them, whatever. And they go and they find this land. And it's almost like, in Eyes of Fire, they find that fort, right? But it's very similar kind of like journey. And then they set up shop. And then it turns out like it's explained way more in Eyes of Fire that this land is bad. But there's definitely the intimation of that in The Witch, where like, the corn doesn't grow well. The goats are starting to, milk blood. There's a scene with the egg that cracks, that it's like got the bloody chick in it or whatever. And is this the influence of The Witch? And Anya Taylor-Joy was saying in that afterward interview that like some people's interpretation of the movie is that Thomasin was a witch all along. She said that it's fine, like that's great, it's what it means to you. That was not my interpretation, she said, because she feels like it was a question from the audience, and the guy in the audience had said like, I really feel like they point the finger at her to the degree that it ultimately turns her into what it's like they need an explanation, they need somebody to blame, so they blame their own daughter because they can't blame anybody. And, but is it the land? Is it's so I don't know, but anyway.
Well, that's an interesting take on that, because my interpretation, especially of the second viewing, is that from the get-go, the younger children are talking about how Thomasin is bewitched, and almost from the get-go, like when the baby disappears, which is so unfortunate. You feel so bad for her when it happens, but that's another crazy scene when you think about it. Like it cuts from like her playing peekaboo to like, because her eyes are not covered for that long.
Seconds.
Like if that's supposed to be in real time, it is seconds. So that old crone runs from the edge of the forest, grabs this child, and is gone.
Well, or she bewitched her in a way that slowed her down, or she was.
That's a possibility. I didn't think about that, but that's a possibility.
That's kind of more how I see it.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that.
Because you do see like when she opens her eyes again, and it's like the same interval, like there's a couple iterations of the peekaboo, and then it's like that last one, it's about the same amount of an interval with her eyes closed, and she opens, you see nothing, and then you just see like a branch move way off in the distance, right before the wall of the trees start that leads into the forest.
That's a good way. That I mean, that you might be very spot on about that, and it like considering that, then it feels like they've been they're like, if you want to interpret that the actual everything is as actually happening, then it feels like that old woman working with the devil, working with Black Phillip, they're kind of recruiting her. She then gets set up as the reason that Sam disappears.
Yep.
She's the one that Caleb disappears with and then comes back, but Caleb doesn't come back. And when Caleb comes back, he appears in front of her. He doesn't appear in front of anyone else. And then the kids are talking about how she's bewitched, and Black Phillip has told them. And like, and like when Caleb dies, and she starts shaking, and like the kids start shaking, like Mercy and I'm forgetting his name, the other son.
Oh God.
But when they start shaking and having their little chanty weird moment, that like it feels like recruiting. Then it feels like they're setting Thomasin up so that her family turns on her, and then once they're all gone, he steps in, and it's like, hey, this is my moment. I've got her now.
Mercy and Jonas. So one of the things I don't remember if I thought like this viewing really cemented this for me. Mercy and Jonas. So there's a whole thing where Caleb comes back, and the father is blaming her, and she runs out, or the mother's blaming her. She runs outside. The father follows. Father follows, and he's like, just speak true. And did you sign the book? This and that. She's like, I didn't. And she's beside herself because she's like, I didn't. And then she says, Jonas and Mercy, the twins, they are bewitched. they speak to Black Phillip. He whispers to them, and then it goes back to that scene by the brook where, you know, the takeaway is that Thomason scares Mercy by saying, "I be a witch," blah blah blah. But it starts with Mercy saying, "I be the witch of the woods," and so she says that to her father. He drags her inside, and then it's like he's for somebody that thinks he knows so much about God and the way things are. He's like, first he's like, "Your daughter's not bewitched. Tell your mother what you said about the twins," and she starts telling her, and then it's like he ends up locking all three of them in a thing. But the thing that really cements to me that we don't know what happened to Mercy and Jonas. They're gone. We don't see bodies. They're just gone, right? Well, when Caleb they're trying to all pray around Caleb when he comes back, right? You know, his just magnificent death scene.
Yeah.
They can't remember their fucking prayers, right? And they start to convulse and they lose consciousness because they have been bewitched, because they've been fucking running around. Hey, I mean, they're running around singing tribute to Black Phillip the whole movie. Yeah. So where do they go? I mean, they're so like, I'm hoping they just got turned into that witch butter. But
I think the explanation for the parents becomes that she's the one who's doing it. They say, "Oh, that's your fault." She's manipulating them. She's using her powers to cover herself, and which isn't covering her at all.
Well, and then here's another thing, right? Here's another thing that we were talking about how people are afraid of the natives or the other religion or this or that. The patriarchal society at that time, guess what? They were fucking terrified of women, right?
Yeah.
And having any power. And she's a strong, and they talk about this in that bonus interview as well. Like, they're all afraid of her budding sexuality. You see it through the whole fucking movie. Oh yeah. Right. And then the climactic scene with the mother, she's like calling her a slut and a whore and all this stuff. It's like, Jesus Christ. It's like, what? Just because it's like, oh, she's got tits, she's the enemy, you know? It's like,
well, you know, but there's I don't know if you catch this. There's an interesting moment though, where when she's arguing with the father when Caleb dies and she runs off into the forest and he comes to comfort her, where she blames him. She says, "You brought us here.
Yep.
Oh, we left the colony. It is you who cannot manage your wife. It is you who cannot grow any crops.
You can't do anything but chop wood," she says.
Wood, yeah. Like literally challenging his manhood and saying, like, step up and be a man. Step up and be the man of this family, because we don't have anyone that is being that.
Yeah.
And
that's a great scene. I love that.
It's an interesting moment because in the same way that she's expressing her power as a woman and challenging the patriarchy, she's backing it up by telling him, "Look, stop making this about me being more powerful and be a man. Step up and be a man. You're not being a man." So it's expressing itself by making everyone else blame me because I have my own power.
Yep.
And it's an interesting moment. It's interesting that she's telling him to be a man, and he's like, "You're taking power from me because you're not being a goddamn man."
Yeah, it's like, dude, literally, he's not doing shit. Everything he does, he fucks up. Like, it's starting with the fact that he couldn't just shut the fuck up and and he says at one point he's praying, right? He breaks down, he's praying, he's like, I'm
my pride,
with the filth of pride, and it's like, no fucking shit, buddy, right? Like,
you got your family there, and now it's your fault.
Oh my god, oh god, I don't know. Again, that whole, it just shows what a stupid species we are. You know, I mean, you like to think that it's not all of us, and there's always exceptions, and we're getting better, but that's not that fucking long ago. And it's like, oh, the devil this, the devil that. It's like, no, dude, you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
There's some other stuff in there that I was like, wow, this is interesting. To go back to the concept of folk horror and stories, was that okay, Caleb is younger than Thomason, obviously. But one of the things we see expressed is that Caleb has got stirring sexuality. And one of the ways it expresses himself is he's checking out his sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incestuous, it's troublesome, but he is this poor guy that's stuck out in the middle of this forest all by himself.
Yeah, thanks again, Dad.
His sister is older than him, and like he doesn't want to have these lingering moments of looking at her, but he does.
It's biology.
He can't help but keep checking out her chest. And I found it very fascinating and interesting that, like, from the perspective of another folktale, when he's lost in the forest and he chases the rabbit because he's trying to gain food for the family, and then comes upon that house. When the witch comes out, she's this young,
vivacious,
curvy woman. And she's bursting out of her dress. Like these breasts are bodacious. And we've already seen him barely checking out his sister's, like, kind of barely there, like, chest. Oh my God, here's this woman. She's wearing this tight dress. Her breasts are about to pop out of it. She's got these large doe eyes, this very pretty face, this hair, like she's gorgeous. And he just is lured in. One of the things that caught me was, I didn't catch it the first time I watched it. She's wearing a red hood.
Mm-hmm.
Which feels like an interesting take on the Red Riding Hood story, because one of the takes on the Red Riding Hood story, and it's expressed in like Company of Wolves, as well as some other variations on the story, that the wolf is supposed to be expressed not only as literally as a wolf, like you could be out in the forest as a girl running this wolf, but deeper into the subtext of this story is people telling their children, their daughters, young daughters, these stories of, you go under the road by yourself, you're going to run into wolves, and the wolves are, in this story, wolves, but in the context of the world, they are men.
Yes.
And men are going to come for you. They're going to start talking to you. They're going to talk to you sweet. They're going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to do things to you. It's no mistake that one of the things that she says to the wolf after it's eaten grandma in the story is, what big teeth you have, grandma. What a big mouth you have. It depends on the story, but the variations are big teeth, big mouth. But either way, the response is always the same: the better to eat you with, my dear. Which can be, which is quite literally in some versions of the story, like French versions, a direct statement of cunnilingus.
Yeah.
That being said, it's an expression of, be careful, ladies, out in the world. The men are there for you, and they want you sexually, and they're going to come for you sexually. So when there's the witch, so it's a twist on the story, because it's now a woman. It's this beautiful older woman, and it's this poor young man. When she goes to him, and she's going to now take his youth from him, or whatever she needs to make herself young, because we see her hand that comes up. It's an old crone's hand. She's not going to eat him. She kisses him. And we get the idea that, like, the kiss, the sexuality is going to draw power away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting take on that concept. It's an interesting twist on the old story. And it becomes about the world being as dangerous for a young man. Like, there are going to be older women too.
Yeah.
For Thomasin, there's the allure of the handsome devil. For Thomas, for her brother, it's this vivacious, curvy young witch. And either way, like, your passions can lead you dangerous places.
And definitely. I mean, and it goes back to what you said about Eyes of Fire, where it manifests as what you know.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing too about the story, I mean, because I'm not saying that passions are evil, but like, I think one of the things that the story suggests, especially in the way that everyone is so guarded, everyone is so buttoned down. If Caleb had been able possibly to go to his parents, either of them, and say, I'm having these weird moments, Mom and Dad. Because it doesn't just occur when he wakes up and looks at her as she's sleeping. It's later at the river when when he comes and she's at the river. Like, again, he's looking at her and she's like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, nothing. Nothing. It's not something to talk about. He is stuck in having to deal with these feelings on his own. And if he goes to either of his parents, they're gonna be like, the devil has got you.
Yeah, exactly.
And like,
exactly.
they might make him take his pants down and like whip his penis or something. Like, who knows?
Man. Who knows
what manner of treatment they might have come up with? But like, there's certainly like a very like weirded out by sex society, and like,
dude, he at one point they reference the children when him and Caleb are going into the woods and he's making him recite like his like Bible knowledge or whatever. He's saying like, why, basically, I'm from sin. So in other words, like the fact that the mother and the father had to have sex to conceive a child is sin. Like, you're fucking serious.
Yes, which is a criticism of Christianity, and it's a rightful Christianity. Absolutely, it's a rightful criticism of Christianity in the fact that like,
your maker gave you this biology, whatever that maker is.
Well, not just that, but I mean, original sin, like that's a big part of the Genesis, a big part of the story of Adam and Eve. That like the big thing about the story is that like they taste the fruit, and now they realize, oh my God, we're naked. So they cover themselves up. And in covering themselves up and being ashamed of their bodies, God shows up and goes, wait, you weren't like this before. You know now. You know. Oh, you gotta go. Oh, I'm punishing you. And what your punishment is, you're gonna have to live lives, and eventually you're gonna die. You're no longer immortal. You're dead. You're gonna die.
You're
get
kicked
ready for
out
that.
of the Garden of Eden, and dude, and the pain of labor or whatever. But like, look, like I've said this. I'm sure on this podcast,
every person is born with the concept of original sin attached to them, because we come from the concept of two people had to do it for us to get born. Yeah, and those people doing it was a sin, so it's attached to the people who were produced out of it. I mean, which is it's a weird way to make people worship and attach to a religion, but it's one of the ways that it's done.
It's one of the main ways it's done, right? It's all fear, right? But I mean, like I've said this before, and it's the idea. Lucifer Morningstar, the light bringer, like he's literally the bad guy in Christianity because he showed up and was like, "You don't have to be stupid and naked." So what does it tell you that the supposed God wanted them to be stupid and naked? Like, that's fucking weird, man.
Well, you know what? What's interesting? I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up. That is a lot of that comes from a lot of that like story and how it's interpreted, and even the way Christianity grabbed onto it was from Paradise Lost. Because in the actual biblical text, which I've read, it's a serpent, and the serpent is actually punished. The serpent has legs in the story. Yeah, and he bruised his heel. So when they are cast out, the serpent is cast out and his legs are taken away from him. Yeah. So he has to crawl on his belly on the warm earth. Yeah. For the rest of time. And then Milton comes along and writes Paradise Lost, and people go, oh, look, the serpent was the devil was there. Yeah. And like, was the devil there or maybe not?
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. It's funny how those two things, the Bible story and Paradise Lost, are so interconnected in modern consciousness. I mean, it's like you almost can't extract. You have to sit down and like really kind of reread the texts in order to separate them.
Exactly. But I mean, it's there in this movie. I mean, you've got the rabbit and you've got the goat, and the goat. I mean, there's religious texts that talk about him as Satan or the adversary appearing as this person with a goat's head, with multiple eyes. And there's also I didn't know this, but I was reading a little bit trivia about the witch, and like that the hair appears in different early texts, especially at that period, as like being treacherous, and almost like in Native American texts they have the coyote, a trickster spirit. Someone that drives people into evil and is intentionally doing bad things to lure people in, or intentionally luring people in towards evil. That's when we see that rabbit is on screen is as villainous as the goat is. Which is to say, depending on how much you give yourself over to the symbology and the concept of like those are either the devil or the devil as a manifestation.
The symbolism.
It's either them creating that, or it's actually happening. It's hard to say. It's how much you want to do, how much you want to go down that road.
Yeah, definitely. Oh man, there's so much. Oh my God. Oh, and it really just all goes down to, once again, it's like, just accept responsibility for your own fucking actions, for fuck's sake. You know, it's like, drives me fucking crazy.
But I think that just bleeds into one of the things that I think is great about folk horror too. Is it's a lot about interpretation. It's a lot about how you view things, how you understand them. Like, I don't want to touch too heavily on this because I'll get more into it when we get to this movie. But I expressed the statement that when I finally watched the old Wicker Man, how much I didn't think the villagers were evil.
I don't think they are at all.
With the exception of a human sacrifice, a lot of the things that I think in the 60s would have worked is like, look at how like evil they are. Like, I'm like sitting there thinking like, they just seem like hippies to me. They just seem really free
and really
and like not bogged down by Christianity. Like, like they're not given over to this like concept of like the body's bad. You all have to be covered up, and what do you do and dancing naked? Well, it feels good. No, it doesn't, God. Oh no, the devil is in you.
Yeah, right. Well, and the inspector, he borderline. It's like, he's almost a fucking like somebody from the Crusades. Like, he's ready. He's shouting at people constantly how they're wrong and they're pagan and they're disgusting and this. I mean, it's like, bro, like you're the out of towner. You better watch your ass.
Exactly.
Like, really?
Hey,
but he really
down, buddy.
He comes in from that position that he's right, which is what we're talking about with all of this, where it's like this culture that's like butting up against an indigenous, culture and saying like, I'm right and you're wrong. And it's like, man, you really talk about some fucking audacity.
You gotta calm down.
Exactly. Like, dude, that guy, if you look up audacity in my dictionary, it's his picture. Holy fuck, man.
Yeah, you're right.
I
think you know what? I think it's one of the reasons that in the to go back to the first one, in Eyes of Fire, the reason that Marion makes it. I mean, Marion faces down the witch. Marion actually becomes like stuck for a while with the witch in whatever like weird tree parallel universe there is. Eventually becomes free of the witch and returns to his wife. And I think that one of the reasons that he is allowed to is because he's a lot closer to land. He's a lot more in tune with things. He's a lot more of like, hey, let's not be here because this isn't a good place to be.
Yeah.
And Smythe is like, no, the Lord will provide. The Lord will save us. And I think the reason, and I think it's another reason. I think it's the reason that the evil doesn't take Smythe. The evil instead like drives Smythe to suicide. Like we hear and we see him cock the gun, and then we hear the gunshot.
Yeah.
They don't show up. They don't take his spirit. They don't pull him in, because they can realize that it's another, the witch can understand it's another belief structure that she then will have to come up against. So instead, she just rids herself of him.
Yeah.
And person she does try to shake, Marion, is a lot more in tune with the land, is a lot more in tune with the native peoples.
Yeah,
he actually
totally.
speaks the language of the native peoples.
When you first
and
see
is able
him,
to break free because of the spirit of another person that's a lot more in tune with nature.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you first see him, he comes in that weird like costume disguise thing, and he's like actually talking to the natives. It's like he understands because of the nature, like he's a hunter, right, or a trapper.
Yeah.
So it's like he understands the land in a way that a lot of the other, Europeans there don't. And he realizes, like, I mean, I feel like in order to do that, you're living off the land. So you have to kind of live with the land and like learn from it. Right. So he's closer to these indigenous belief systems than somebody like Smythe, who is a perfect distillation of, the preacher, where it's just like, he's just using it to get what he wants. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And plus it ends badly for him.
Yeah. And plus he's opposite of the land. He wants to settle it. He wants to colonize it. He wants to build cities and forts and things on top of it. He wants to bring his culture and his civilization, symbolized by the books, and build libraries on top of it. And it doesn't want that. It's like, no, thank you. No, that's not what we want. I didn't think about this before, but it's probably one of the reasons why at the end of the film, when the two girls have told their story and the captain says, well, can you take these girls away? Why we see that French soldier that has the eyes of the witch, because they're now that evil.
Yeah.
The colonizers are now that evil. They're now spreading their belief structure. They're now going to take over the land. And
that's interesting.
And they're going to become the prominent evil of the world. They're going to be the ones that spread and colonize America and make it into the cities and things we live in now, and take away the connection to the nature.
Wow, good way to wrap that, man. That's fucking awesome.
That was totally by accident.
Yeah, but that's what happens when you have conversations like this. Is it's exactly. Like that's the whole point. Is you're looking for illumination and for these connections. So what do you say we stop there? We were going to go into some other things, but I think we can in the next Sticks and Stones we can kind of touch. I would like to touch back on a little bit of Eyes of Fire to segue into some other stuff, because there's some overlapping. So until then, I'm Sean.
I'm Ray.
And this has been Sticks and Stones, a presentation of the Horror Vision Horror Podcast.